one day a week, 1 minute of heavy intense exercise. Repeat that 3 times. That's 6 minutes of activity, and you've already improved glucose responses and HDL levels and all those other things. It's certainly of health benefit. But in terms of burning calories, you haven't really done a lot.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Bay.com, Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer, Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course. So this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's HITUNI.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support. Well, hello there. I am Lawrence Neal, and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that teaches you how to optimize your high-intensity training protocol and your high-intensity training business to help you achieve your health, fitness, and business goals. I've interviewed many of the top experts in HIIT and high-intensity training business and other related fields, including Sean Baker, MD, Dr. Ted Naiman, Rob Wolf, Mark Sisson, Tim Ryan, Dr. Doug McGuff, Skylar Tanner, Drew Bay, Dr. James Steele, and many, many more. My next guest is Christopher Scott, PhD. Chris is a professor of the Department of Exercise Health and Sports Sciences at the University of Southern Maine. Chris is a leading contributor to the field of exercise physiology and the author of the textbook A Primer for the Exercise and Nutrition Sciences, Thermodynamics, Bioenergetics, Metabolism. His research focus is estimating the energy costs of strength, speed, and power before, during, and after exercise, work, and fitness-related activities. Oh, that's quite a mouthful. Dr. Scott directs the Human Performance Laboratory, where he works closely with USM students on projects related to the estimation of energy expenditure before, during, and after exercise and eating. He has published 49 articles in peer-reviewed journals and mentored over 45 undergraduate research projects. His research has been instrumental in measuring the afterburn effect. Recent findings confirm that energy costs actually rise in the recovery from certain forms of exercise. We cover how Chris's methods for measuring energy expenditure differ from traditional models and the barriers that he's encountered in the scientific community. We discuss what exercise protocols have the highest energy expenditure and how effective is exercise really for fat loss. We did have some minor audio issues on this one resulting from the Skype internet to landline connection, and I do apologize for that, but sometimes it's really difficult to get perfect audio at both ends. And sometimes in order to make the interview happen, you just have to put up with it and get through it. But nonetheless, it was very audible for the most part and does contain some fascinating insights. So for all of the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org, and don't forget to hang around to the end of this episode for your free gift. And now I give you exercise research pioneer, Dr. Chris Scott. Chris, thanks for doing this. Thank you for joining me on Corporate Warrior today. I appreciate it. I'm going to, something I haven't mentioned actually before we got recording officially, is I am going to link to the interview you did with builtlean.com, because I think that's an excellent interview for people to listen to who just want to understand the fundamentals of, I guess, some of the things we'll be talking about.
Right.
But just to kick things off, this was actually a question from a colleague of yours, Dr. James Steele, who's a mutual friend. Can you explain for the layperson how you conceptualize, how your conceptualization and methods for measuring energy expenditure differ from traditional models?
Sure, that's straightforward. If you really look at the history of exercise physiology, and look at what's come out, or the work that's come out of exercise physiology laboratories worldwide, I think we have to start by looking at what's called steady state exercise, which is best exemplified by cycling and running. And in fact, if you go to most human performance labs around the globe, standard equipment in most laboratories are cycle ergometers and treadmills. And so based on that, those are really the easiest tools in order to study exercise. And so I guess you can go back to the 1940s and 50s where obviously there were some studies before that. You could talk about Antoine Lavoisier in the 1790s and so on and so forth. But I think modern day exercise physiology was essentially getting somebody on a bicycle or getting them on a treadmill and having them perform steady state work such as cycling at 10 miles an hour or something for 40 minutes or so. And most of the the studies that look at the relationship between how exercise affects health and well-being, it's really been centered around the steady state model. And that certainly includes energy costs. More specifically, how many calories do you burn while you exercise? And so sort of to wrap this up, if you look at any energy cost description of pretty much every exercise and activity that's ever been published, it's in a calories per minute format. And the moment you see, bicycling at 10 miles an hour burns 6 calories, per minute or something along those lines, you should recognize that as a steady state estimate.
And is that based? Have they based that on oxygen uptake? Is that the?
That's correct. So, yeah, and that's a thing that what I try to remind people, including colleagues of mine, is that I look at myself as I'm in the guesstimation business. I don't measure calories directly, and ironically, we used to measure the heat production of working human beings, but it's so costly, so prohibitive that we don't do that anymore. So now we measure, instead of measuring heat, we measure oxygen uptake, and then we convert that measurement of oxygen into an estimate of heat production, which many recognize as calories.
And is that way of measuring is, from what I understand, is limited in its ability to capture everything that's going on. Is that accurate?
It is. It is. If the moment, I'm under the impression the moment you get into higher intensity activity, and especially intermittent activity, then the steady state model doesn't apply. If you're doing low to moderate intensity steady state exercise, I have no problem whatsoever with the steady state model. But the moment you get into, for example, 10-second, 20-second, 30-second sprints with maybe 2 minutes of recovery, and you do that repeatedly, I do not believe that the steady state model holds true. And in fact, I would like to point out that I think most exercise scientists, most exercise physiologists, they would recognize the words steady state and non-steady state are not the same thing. And then I would say, well, then why are you continually applying steady state methodology to non-steady state activity? And the answer I gave is because that's the way it's traditionally been done.
But that's such a rubbish answer.
Absolutely, it's a rubbish answer. And then you got to look at the fact that we don't measure heat anymore. There are no calorimeters, which is a device that measures heat. There are none in the world that I'm aware of anymore that are large enough to house a human being. And so there's really no way of determining if any other way is more valid than the steady state way. So I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. And I've got people that support me, and I've got people who think that what I do is absolute rubbish.
Because that rebuttal sounds like it's ridiculous. Like, for someone who you would expect to be quite intelligent to say that, you almost think it would be laughable. So how do you respond to that?
Well, what I try to do is, not to be argumentative or go on the attack per se, but is to just nicely describe how we're actually in the same situation. You say that my model, which doesn't look at costs per minute, I look at things as a cost per task. Not as a cost per minute to run a mile, but the cost to run a mile. And I would say that while I don't have validity for that, the truth of the matter is you don't have validity saying that the steady state model actually applies to non-steady state intermittent activity. So from a very real perspective, we're actually both, under the same condition here.
So was looking at your, and obviously the different ways where you explore how more intense exercise contributes to energy expenditure can be found on that interview you did with Built Lean. So there's an excellent article which summarizes that as well, and we'll dig into some of that in a bit. So there's a bit on the university page on your profile, and it says recent findings from our human performance lab confirm that energy costs actually rise in the recovery from some but not all types of exercise. We are currently determining what exercises specifically promote this energy cost, and we'll be designing exercise programs to exploit this finding. Now, sorry to read all of that out. I'm sure you've heard that enough. But what are the have there been any findings? I'm not sure how long that statement's been on your website for, but have there been any findings there at all?
Yeah, what we've done is we've looked at I essentially modified a device called a Smith machine. I don't know if that's the way you call them. So this is a horizontal bar that travels along a track, and this allows us to get we don't have a measurement of inertia, but it gives us a measurement of force and the distance that the bar travels, which is the weight that's on the bar and the distance that the bar travels. That gives us an idea of what the work is. And we started essentially taking energy cost measurements of resistance training. And surprisingly, and again, we can bring the steady state model, if you look at the energy costs of bicycling or walking, jogging, or running, the greatest amount of oxygen consumed is actually during the activity. And what we found with weightlifting is, a set of weightlifting might last 30 seconds or so. And the oxygen cost of that 30 seconds is actually quite low. When you rack the weight, and this was we've seen this with a variety of different resistance training exercises. When you rack the weight and the person is recovering, what happens is oxygen uptake actually spikes in recovery. And then it goes down, which is crazy if you think about it. Again, with the steady state model, the most amount of oxygen you consume is during the exercise. With resistance training, which is intermittent, high intensity intermittent training, most of the oxygen you consume is actually in recovery, not during the exercise. I think that's a huge find. In fact, as a scientist, you go back and has anyone ever discovered this before? This is interesting. There was a paper in 1969. They didn't have a figure, which I think throws people off. They just had tables full of numbers. Nobody likes looking at tables full of numbers. And sure enough, I think they did an arm curl and a bench press and a squat. And they actually had, in liters per minute, which is steady state methodology, they actually had a higher energy cost at the end of exercise than during the exercise. And yet nobody caught on to that. And in fact, when I first submitted a paper for publication with this finding, and I said this was first discovered in 1969, it was actually rejected by the publisher or the reviewer because this is a finding that's already been recognized. And it's one of those laughable moments, well, it's already been recognized. How come nobody talks about it?
Yeah, you've definitely got it quite tough, haven't you, in your field?
It's how science works, Lawrence. You got to real. I can be all pissed off about it and stuff, but the truth of the matter is that's how science works. You got to find something, and then you have to convince people that that this is meaningful, and that's the part that takes time. It's not me convincing them, it's them recognizing that maybe they were wrong, and people don't want to recognize that they were wrong.
Yeah. Was it you that actually coined the afterburn effect? Was that you, or?
No, I don't think I coined the word afterburn. Okay. When I first heard that term afterburn, I had no idea what the heck it really meant. But then after talking with people in the fitness industry, I think that's really that doesn't come from science. That comes more from the business side of fitness, I think.
Right, yeah.
It's a macho word, you know what I mean? Afterburn.
No, exactly. It's just trying. I suppose I'm trying to make sure that I've got the right understanding here. So, in Body by Science, Dr. Don McGuff talks about the amplification cascade. Are you familiar with that kind of mechanism? And is that the same as what when we talk about the afterburn? Is it the same thing, or is it different?
I'm actually not sure if he's talking about energy costs or if he's talking about. I'm not familiar with it. Is it a hormonal response or is it physiological response that occur?
It's a hormonal response. It's the cytokines and the myokines.
So if you're talking about muscular development and hypertrophy and things like that, protein synthesis, I mean, these are things that can certainly increase metabolic rate for a time after exercise. But boy, now you're getting into the effect, not so much an afterburn period, but now you're talking about an elevated metabolic rate that exercise promotes. And I'm not convinced that you can tell someone, hey, increase your resting metabolic rate by exercising regularly. I've just seen as much research that denies that as supports it. So I'm not really sure about that, but certainly building protein, building muscle is very costly. How it adds to daily energy costs, I think that's still open to interpretation.
So it was my understanding that muscle, obviously each pound of muscle you have only burns X amount of calories to sustain it. So surely if you've built muscle, then you are increasing your metabolic rate. Is that not true?
Yeah, if you, now we're talking about body weight. Even, if you're a larger being, if you will, then you're certainly going to consume more oxygen, and your metabolic rate will be elevated. But I would argue also on the common sense side of things that most people, if they exercise for a period of time, they don't really build that much more muscle. And it's nice to be able to promote that, but in reality, is it really happening? My guess is maybe, but probably slightly. So in fact, I've come to the conclusion that if you want to lose weight and you choose exercise to do so, you've made the wrong primary choice. Exercise certainly helps, but if you want to, the summer's over, but during spring, if you wanted to get yourself into a swimsuit body and lose body weight, you'd probably be much better off with a nutritional plan than an exercise plan. Now, with that being said, I think that weight gain over a lifetime, so my ability to gain weight 10, 20, 30 years from now, that's what exercise, I think, has the biggest impact on. It prevents that sort of long-term gain.
How so? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, for myself, for example, ever since I was 18 years old, right up to when I was 47, I weighed 185 pounds. And now I'm 55 years old now, and I weigh about 200 pounds. It's like, where did that 15 pounds come from? It's probably from a reduction in my metabolic rate. I still exercise fairly regularly, certainly not with the intensity that I used to. But I think that the exercise that I did do was essentially preventing weight gain in the future, not so much, to burn something like 400 calories in a single exercise session, I think is beyond the scope of most people. You're only going to find highly motivated people that can do that. And in that case, if you look at 4,000 calories per pound of fat, you're looking at 10 days of exercising, burning 400 calories in a row before a pound of fat is lost. And again, I think for most people, that's out of the norm, if you will, of human behavior. So again, if you want to lose 10 pounds in 2, 3, 4 months, exercise is not, I believe anyway, exercise is not the primary choice. Does it help? Absolutely, but you would be better off with a nutritional program than you would with an exercise program. But if you do choose to exercise regularly, I think that sets you up for preventing the weight gain that comes with aging.
And I don't know if you've already answered that, but could you elaborate on why you think that it helps as you age?
I think, it probably helps maintain a higher resting metabolic rate from that perspective.
Right.
And again, this is just an energy cost perspective. So now you get into what you were talking about with, the cytokines and the all of the signals at the cellular level and so on and so forth. And it's, the fact that we lose or that people gain weight over time. It has so much more to do than just activity levels. There's just a society component. There's a behavioral component. I think you're probably well aware of this. There's more things than we can actually put our finger on. So it's actually a lot more complicated than this calories in, calories out, that I've been essentially told or brought up to memorize. I think it's more complicated than that.
Yeah. It's something I struggle with a lot, the whole calories in, calories out argument, because there's so much. I know we're kind of deviating off into kind of the diet sphere now, which I know might not be your area.
Yep.
But there's so many different kind of dietary recommendations out there. I've had Gary Taubes on the podcast talking about low carb, high fat. But a few people in that kind of domain supporting that method, and then obviously I've got people that are calories in, calories out. The way I understand it now, stop me if we're going into territory where we shouldn't, but is that ultimately it does come down when it comes to fat loss. It does come down to calories in, calories out, or it comes down to energy expenditure, I should say. It's just how you get there matters. So your lifestyle can. I mean, again, I know we're going off in a weird territory here, but, for instance, if you eat the wrong types of foods, you might be more akin to eat too much,
Right. Here's what I read an article a few months back, and it really was eye-opening for me. It was from the nutritional thing, and they were also trying to dismiss this whole calorie is a calorie thought. And as an example, let's just look at the way we prepare a meal. So I'm going to prepare a meal for you of carrots. So there's a variety of ways I can do this. I can take a carrot and I can, wash it off and clean it and give it to you. And you can eat that carrot. Now that carrot's full of fiber and roughage, and there's only so many calories that are essentially available to you based on that. And you would have to digest that and assimilate that, and that raises your what we call the thermic effect of feeding and all that other stuff. But if I were to, let's say, cook that carrot and destroy that roughage, now I've made even more calories available to you, and you're going to consume those calories that are available to you. And so you're eating the same thing, this carrot that might have 80 calories in it. The way you prepared it might dictate how many calories are actually available to you. And then this whole concept of microbes in your gut, and people have different microbes in their gut, how important it actually is to nutrition, and how these things are actually digesting this and processing this food, and you're taking what they digested and maybe assimilating it as well. And the list just goes on and on and on. And I think it sort of alludes to the fact that it's a little bit more than just weight gain and weight loss is a little bit more than just, counting calories based on a menu of food choices.
Well said.
That's as far as I would go with that.
Well, no, I appreciate you expressing your opinion and not deferring. So going back to designing exercise programs to kind of exploit this increased energy cost. I appreciate what you're saying. It is very secondary to diet, and there's that saying you can't outwork a bad diet. However, it's interesting nonetheless for some of us exercise geeks. So, in terms of I wonder, you mentioned obviously one study design, but have you kind of narrowed down on any exercise protocols that seem to be more effective or the most effective to choose from for this outcome?
What I'm under, based on partial and impartial facts, because I'm certainly, I don't have enough data to actually convince the world this is what you need to be doing. But from what I've seen, and what the information that we've collected from our lab, I'm under the impression that very brief, high-intensity, large muscle mass activity followed by a brief active recovery period, and repeat that several to many times, and that's probably the best you're going to be able to do in terms of maximizing energy costs.
Can you elaborate on what a brief active recovery period is?
So let's start with exercise. So let's say you teach someone how to do a clean and a jerk, for example. Mm-hmm. So those are, or a snatch. I mean, with a relatively heavy weight, you're using a large muscle mass. I would do no more than like maybe 7 or 8 reps or something like that. And then I would tell that person to drop the weight and go for a 2-minute or 3-minute or 4-minute walk, and then repeat that activity. Or a better thing would be, maybe because there's not a lot of technique involved, pushing or pulling a weighted sled for maybe 10 seconds or so, and then taking a 2 or 3 or 4-minute walk, and repeating that over and over again. What we have shown with resistance training is that we looked at the cost to work ratio of resistance exercise. The worst efficiency, which is the most inefficient, which is what you want if you want to lose weight. You want to be inefficient. You want to burn calories. Comes at the heaviest workloads with the briefest repetitions.
Interesting. And the recovery, active recovery you're talking about, what is the purpose of that during all this?
To keep your metabolic rate elevated, number one, and to bring back the resemblance of a homeostasis in those muscles that you were using, so that you can actually complete another bout of that higher intensity exercise. Because obviously fatigue is part of that as well. We actually found that can increase metabolic rate for a limited period of time. But again, asking, I always consider the social aspect of it, and asking people to lift a weight, and this is James Steele and Jim Fisher as well. They're looking at the physiological things, but to ask people, normal, everyday people, to exercise to exhaustion for every set that they do for a period of time, I think what you're going to end up with is an empty gym, because most people don't want to do that, So,
well, you say that you got Luke over at Discover Strength. He seems to be doing quite well. Are you familiar with his facilities? I
am not. I mean, this is. I think a lot of people, and don't get me wrong. I from a physiological perspective, I am nothing less than utterly amazed at the physiological adaptations and health. So if you're an athlete and you're not doing high-intensity intermittent work, something's wrong. You're crazy. If you want to improve health, I would rather you do a bout or two of high-intensity exercise rather than steady-state exercise. The improvements are as great, if not greater, than continuous bouts of cycling and running. But I'm an energy cost guy, with weight loss. And I just don't see huge caloric costs with really high intensity exercise.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, just as a hypothetical example, if you did some sort of high intensity workout or resistance training session, as you described just now, what would you be looking at in terms of a surplus of energy cost? What could we be looking at? I don't know whether you can say 500 calories or X%, or how you could respond to that, but.
Yeah, this is, I've actually, I have a book that I just wrote, and it's actually in the publisher's hands right now. So it's probably something that once it's all said and done, this is going to be, I would say, maybe around the holiday season, late December, early January. That's when it's going to be released.
Okay.
And it's written more for a layperson audience than it is for scientists. But I hope the easy tone of the manuscript I'm going to laugh at this, hope you will too, actually makes colleagues of mine better understand the whole thing about caloric costs.
Sorry, Chris,
as well.
could you just repeat that last bit? You just cut out a second.
Yeah, this is, I'm turning my computer on. I'm wondering if that interferes with the signal here. But I wrote this book to try to, in the context of lay people understanding it, that mostly maybe people in the fitness industry can understand. I did not write it for scientists. But on the other hand, I'm hoping that this might be what most scientists need to bring about the understanding of metabolic costs. So I just opened my computer, and I'm going to just give you a few energy cost estimates here.
Cool, great. And anyone who didn't quite catch that because you broke up a little bit, it's giving the layman kind of version of for scientists. Did you say to help? Right.
Yep. And then just based on activities and exercises, comparing steady state methodology with what I call cost per task, which is the cost of performing the activity, not per minute, per activity, per set, for example, if you're weight training.
Yeah.
So I guess, and I've randomly chosen because, again, this is subjective on my behalf, but I've just picked this random number of performing 400 calories of exercise per session. And based on that, you would expect a pound of fat to be lost based purely on exercise every 10 days. So in order to get 400 calories burned walking, you would have to walk about 4 miles. If you're bicycling at 6 miles per hour, that's going to take you an hour to do that. And if you're bicycling at 15 miles per hour, that's going to take about 30 minutes, half an hour. Mm-hmm. Now let's go to cost per task routine. So we did, you're familiar with Tabata training, correct?
Yep, Tabata training, yep.
Yep, and I'm sure your audience is as well.
Yep.
So we're talking 20 minutes of exercise, 10 seconds of recovery. You repeat that 6 to 8 times. So we did a study where we did a Tabata training with various types of exercise, but the one that I'll mention is isometric wall squats. So for 20 seconds, you squat down until your flat thighs are parallel with the floor, and you hold that for 20 seconds, right? Mm-hmm. Then you do your 10 seconds of recovery, and you repeat that 8 times. Now, if you want to burn 400 calories, you would need to complete 26 consecutive 4-minute Tabata routines.
26 consecutive, did he say?
26. In fact, you're only burning for each 4-minute routine about 16 calories. As crazy as this, and this is what I describe in the book. The first chapter is like you cannot equate physical or perceived exertion with caloric cost. Just because you think, if you're holding that isometric squat, you're on your 8th set, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I must be burning so many calories. In effect, you're not really burning any. You have to, or very little, I should say. You have to start moving before you really start burning a greater amount of calories. So think about it. I mean, what would you rather do? Burn 400 calories? Do you rather go on an hour-long, 6-mile-an-hour bike ride, or would you rather do 26 4-minute Tabata routines?
Probably do
the choice is yours.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not talking about training from, increasing strength, speed, and power. I have to emphasize this over and over. In the book, I say it over and over again. This is not a book about increasing physical performance. And when I give talks, people come up to me after the talk and they're like, "Wait a minute, are you talking about strength gains and power gains?" And I'm like, "No, I'm talking about burning calories, weight loss. This has nothing to do with physical performance. Let's burn calories here." And what I found is that it's ridiculous. I mean, here's one. We did a heavy bag punching routine. So we trained these college-age kids to do this 96 punch heavy bag routine. It lasted 1 minute long, so they had to do 6 consecutive, very rapid punches, and then they would reset their feet. And we found out that we could repeat this 16 times, so it was like 96 punches in that 1 minute. If you wanted to burn 400 calories, you would have to have 13 rounds of that heavy bag punching. Here's 250 watts of cycling for 1 minute. That's, for most people, that's a pretty good power output, 250 watts. If you wanted to burn 400 calories, you would have to do 14 1-minute sprints. And that includes recovery periods with that. And on and on and on it goes. I mean, with the resistance exercise where we did bench press, it's relatively smaller muscle mass compared to like a deadlift or a squat. We found just ridiculous numbers. If you wanted to, go ahead.
No, sorry. The one you just mentioned, the 14 1-minute sprints.
Yep.
I suppose in terms of like return on investment, it's not bad in terms of the time, but it's the kind of severity of the task, right? That makes it.
Yeah, I think. And from an energy cost perspective, now if we're talking health, I would absolutely say that you should be doing. I mean, what is Martin Gabala's group up in Canada? Yeah. You only need to complete in 1 day, a week, 2 days a week. You only had to do 1 minute of heavy intense exercise. Repeat that 3 times. That's 6 minutes of activity, and you've already improved glucose responses and HDL levels and all those other things. It's certainly of health benefit. But in terms of burning calories, you haven't really done a lot.
Yeah, interesting. I wondered if, I appreciate this, caveat all this by saying I know this is very much a secondary activity when it comes to burning or reducing, burning calories or reducing caloric intake, or losing fat, I should say. So, well, if you are undertaking some sort of high intensity exercise or high intensity strength training, and you wanted to do it frequently for this outcome, could you be doing it too frequently? Could that have a negative effect? In terms of like not being able to recover from exercise, and then that having an impact on the calories you burn thereafter.
Yeah, and that's the point that I make here as well, is that the truth of the matter is you're not burning as many calories as you are, and then you have to start thinking about what are you doing physiologically, in terms of maybe creating the conditions where you're more susceptible to injury. Do you have CrossFit in the UK?
We do, yep. Unfortunately.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm happy with CrossFit and the fact that people actually join it and do it. But and I know a lot of them, I haven't had a single physical therapist that I'm aware of not telling me that a significant part of their clientele comes from CrossFit.
Yeah.
I've had students, this is crazy. You have to recognize it's not everyone. but it's this mindset that some people have. I had this young lady. She was an exercise physiology major in our program. She was devoted to CrossFit every single day. And of course, the problem that I have with CrossFit is that it's a competition. It's not a workout. And so you're competing every single day. This person's knees and ankles were in such bad shape that she couldn't even take the stairs, and we're on the 4th floor of this building, to her exercise physiology class. She had to take the elevator. And one day she comes in and her hands, they're literally ripped up. Her calluses are torn open. Jesus. And I'm like, gosh, that just must hurt. And she's like, yep. But nope, here she goes. I'm definitely going to CrossFit tonight. I've never missed a CrossFit. And it's like, boy, you can't walk upstairs and you can't grab anything with your hands because of what you're putting yourself through, but you're not going to quit it either. And yep.
Yeah, it's addictive, I suppose.
I guess, yeah. And exercise is good for you, but when you start doing stuff like that, I have to conclude that exercise is bad for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the injury part of things that you really have to worry about. We did a study. I mean, this is it actually was based on some of the work of James Steele and Dan Fisher. That sets to exhaustion. We did, and this is kind of funny, I guess, in a morbid sort of way. But we designed a study where people did 3 sets of squats at 50% of a 1 repetition maximum. And so, just off the top of my head, for most guys, whatever that would be, they would squat maybe 35 reps for the first set. And then we waited 90 seconds was the recovery period, and we did another set, and that might be, 20, 15 reps. Then we wait another 90 seconds for the third set, and we got maybe 7, 8, 9 repetitions, and then we would have the person recover. The average caloric cost for that routine, which most people would say was incredibly intense, was 70 calories for men, and it was about 50 calories for women. And we had several people complain of nausea. We had one guy throw up after the routine. We had one guy he tried to stand up, but he would just kind of collapse, and he couldn't stand for about another 5 minutes or so. And then we actually had another guy pass out, and we had to call the emergency people in, and fortunately everything ended well for everybody involved. But, I just have to sit there and think about, okay, now maybe from a performance perspective, that's a workout you might want to do. But if you choose to do that to lose weight, really? You just burned 70 calories, and it took you, the whole routine lasted with the recovery at the end about 23 minutes. So my question to you would be, all right, if you want to burn calories, would you rather take a 23-minute walk and burn 100 calories, or would you rather lift to complete and utter exhaustion for 3 consecutive sets and burn about 100 calories? Same time period.
Yeah.
Again, it's your choice.
Yeah. But what about the other factors? The EPOC effect and the lactic acid contribution. Like, doesn't that mean that you will burn more doing the former?
I think the resistance. I think the data shows that lactic acid. It's simply a glucose molecule that's been split in half. That's all it is. And from that perspective, this is what I tell my students. You got to look at it not as a poison or anything, but it's actually fuel. It is. You have to, before you can oxidize glucose, it has to be split in half, and that's lactic acid. So first and foremost, it's just simply a fuel. So using this fuel really doesn't elevate metabolic rate that much. In fact, it's when you burn fat as a fuel, it takes more oxygen to burn fat than it does for lactic acid. So I don't really see lactic acid elevations as increasing, the afterburn or EPOC or the oxygen debt, whatever you want to call it. And what the other thing we found is that especially if you're not lifting to failure, if you're just doing sets, maybe with 10 reps or 15 reps or something like that, we found that for single sets, for double sets, and for triple sets, the vast majority, almost everybody, recovers within about a 15-minute time frame. And by recovering, I mean brought back to what a typical standing resting oxygen uptake is. Your recovery oxygen, or your recovery oxygen uptake returns to normal pretty quickly. You have to do something extraordinary. I've seen epoch studies in marathon runners, for example, where epoch might last days. But I've also seen, weightlifting study where epoch supposedly lasted days. And, these studies are all flawed in a way in the sense that I typically see the data collected on just one trial period. And one thing we know is that epoch is extremely variable. So it could be as high as 20 to 30% in any given person. And so you have to perform multiple trial periods before I can come to a conclusive result, and that just isn't being done right now. Our studies, I will add, when we do our weightlifting studies, everything we do, every subject has to repeat that exercise twice, and then we take the average of that. And in fact, we've done it as many as 3 times to get a better account of what's actually going on in terms of caloric cost.
So sort of replicating it to get a more accurate result, effectively.
Right. Yeah. That's a part of science. Repeatability. You have to be able to have replication. And I'm a bit disillusioned when I see a study where one subject came into a lab one time and this is what we found. And that's not convinced that epoch studies are notoriously difficult to do as well. Because you're essentially trying to track someone's metabolic rate over a period of time. That person has to eat. They have to walk around. It's so many things can affect your metabolic rate. Not a lot of you can try to control for it, but it's very difficult to do.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Okay, so just want to move on to some kind of rapid fire questions for you, Chris.
Sure.
What have you in your specific field? What have you changed your mind about in the last year or in recent memory?
Oh, geez, lots of things. One of them is that just from a health perspective, let's say, where in terms of coronary arteries disease, heart disease, which is a leading killer in the United States, I'm sure it is over where you are as well. And, in order to try to alleviate this disease, prevent it, if you will, you need to stop eating or slow down on eating fats and carbohydrates. Fats and cholesterol. And now we're recognizing that it's actually the amount of glucose, sugar, in the diet that's affecting all the heart disease for the most part. That's really an eye-opener. I don't know how many thousands of people I sat down over the last 30 years and said, you need to cut that fat out and cut the cholesterol out of your diet. And then you think it's so crazy it is. Over here, the American Heart Association, what kind of a diet do they recommend for every single person on the planet? A high carbohydrate diet.
They're still recommending that now.
Yeah, you can't make that stuff up. I think it still is recommended by a lot of people, but I've got, again, cardiology friends, and they're starting to come around. They're starting to recognize that. And another thing is just this whole caloric cost, where I can remember when I was getting my undergraduate degree, I took exercise physiology course that everyone has to do, if you're in the fitness field. And I remember being told that in order to determine or estimate anaerobic metabolism, and again, I'll emphasize that anaerobic metabolism. What anaerobic means without air, and we essentially apply that toward without oxygen. So how do you determine anaerobic energy costs? And the answer is you measure oxygen uptake at the end of exercise. And I can remember being literally 19, 20 years old and asking my professor, I just don't get it. In order to determine anaerobic without oxygen energy costs, you need to measure oxygen uptake. And to this day, no one's been able to explain that to me, which is why I essentially developed my own model. And so with high intensity, intermittent type exercise, I don't just measure oxygen uptake during exercise. I also measure it and include the recovery component, which can be very expensive. And I also include a measurement of blood lactic acid levels that I've converted to calories.
Interesting. Was it tough to get funding to do those studies, considering you weren't getting much support from what it sounds like?
I'm lucky in the sense that, and proud at the same time that the school that I'm at, we don't have a graduate program in our department. So there are no master's students, and I do not have PhD students. I only have undergraduate students. And so as a part of their training, they have to take this year-long research course that I teach. It's the only course in our curriculum that lasts a full academic year rather than just one semester. So over the course of 2 semesters, these students have to complete what we call a thesis project. And they can do pretty much anything on their own, but most of them are scared, they're afraid of science, and so they'll willingly go along with what the majority of the focus has been in my lab, which is energy cost studies. And so what I stopped doing is applying for grants. I get small grants from not from major corporations or from the NIH or anything like that, just to buy materials for the lab. But other than that, I'm pretty much fund myself. And so That's how we do. Yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, it started out slow, but I'm averaging probably about 2 or 3 manuscripts a year now, which I think is pretty good for a department that doesn't have a graduate exercise science program. Yeah. And all the work is done by undergraduate students. But they do a good job, and that's what I have to work with. And those are the lemons I've been handed, and I make lemonade out of it. So.
No, it should be very proud. I think from what I've seen and what I've read, which isn't obviously all of your work, but it's very impressive. So, no, it's good stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Not everybody thinks that way, but
what are you? I mean, you mentioned you've got this. You're writing this book. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that and what you're working on currently, just to leave the listeners with your current projects?
Yeah, I'm working. The title of the book is called "An Exercise in Calorie Counting." I still haven't made a decision on how I'm going to release this. If it's going to be an ebook or if it's going to be paperback or whatever. I just haven't made the decision yet. I'm working with a company. I'm actually working with a company. I'm actually paying a company a lot of money to help me with this. So I hope that's going to help. But like I said, I'm trying to do is just sort of put out there, from a science perspective, this is how we count calories. This is how it's been done. This is how it might better be done. And then this is what we found. And what I hope to do is just, especially if you're a trainer and somebody comes in, and there are a lot of people who want this, the goal is weight loss. And what I found is that I just don't think that you should be placing people on exercise programs that are designed to increase strength, speed, and power to try to get them to lose weight. Screaming in someone's face, one more repetition, keep going. Well, what we found is the more repetitions you do, the more efficient the work comes from a weightlifting perspective. Crazy as that sounds. So that's why I was saying earlier that if you're using resistance training to lose weight, you need to keep your sets very brief and relatively heavy, and then go take a short walk. That's the way to maximize caloric cost. So that's what I'm hoping to put the word out there, that that might be the best thing to do.
Good stuff. When is the book going to be out? Do you know?
I think it's going to be, from what I'm told, it's like I said, it's this company actually has it right now. It's been edited, so now it's in the production phase, if you will. So I think that what they're shooting for is toward the end of the year, beginning of the next year. We'll see what happens. Scientific publication is one thing. My first textbook was written solely for scientists. I published in 2008. It's called Primer for the Exercise and Nutritional Sciences. Mm-hmm. And it was a good experience. I remember telling my wife, I just got a lot of stuff off my chest because it really did. It took me 10 years, Lawrence, to write this book.
Oh, wow.
And I really had to dig deep into things like the study of thermodynamics, which was never taught to me. So I had to pretty much self-teach myself and then put it into perspective in a way that maybe fellow scientists will understand. But this is what we're coming up in 10 years now. And my wife, she can be funny at times and frustrating at others, we all know. But I remember saying once, I think I probably made about $5,000 US dollars from this book. And she turned to me, "Oh, honey, you haven't made $5,000 from your textbook." And you just realize, that it's all too human. When I first did this, I was like, I don't care if I make a dime. I just want this information out there and I said, get this off my chest so other people can see it. Now that it's been 10 years later, it's like I want to make money from it too, So I'm hoping this next book that I've written is a little bit more user-friendly and most people will understand it. Hopefully it'll be something that people will want.
Yeah,
I'm sure I'll get in touch with you when it's out there.
Oh,
I could use your help in distributing it.
Yeah, no, definitely do. Well, I was going to say, if I were you, I would. So long as it's appropriate, I would publish it on all platforms. Why not? Hard copy, Kindle, just to maximize the distribution, because it's so inexpensive to launch it on all platforms these days. Amazon make it very, very. If you decide to go for your Amazon, they make it very easy to do so. So yeah, do consider.
Yeah, I think the best I can hope for is to do exactly what you said, because I've obviously put a lot of thought into this, and then what you hope for is that it actually starts to sell. And then a major publisher like Simon & Schuster or Penguin Book or something along those lines actually picks it up and decides, that they're going to actually, put a little bit more of a promotional aspect to it. So that's what I hope happens. But, beggars can't be choosers. We'll just have to wait and see.
Well, you got enough people, I believe, and certainly I'll be pushing it, and James Steele, I'm sure, will as well, and James Fisher.
Yeah.
Cool. So
that's three of you over on the other side of the pond. I guess that's a good start, right?
Yeah, I'm sure there are many more. So what's the best way for people to contact you, Chris, and find out more about what you're up to?
My email at school is cscott, CSCOTT @ and Maine, which is the state of Maine that I live in. So it's MAINE.edu. And I get questions all the time from the public, and I'm certainly happy to answer them.
Cool. And do you want to leave, is there anything kind of final thoughts you have that you'd like to leave the listeners with, perhaps those that are, just to give you some context, a lot of people listening are high intensity training advocates, and they're probably pretty savvy, and they probably know that fat loss comes mostly from diet, or almost all of it comes from diet. But is there any other, thoughts you would leave the listeners with?
Yeah, the only thing I would lead is, I'm not trying to undermine high intensity training. I think, from a health and well-being perspective, it's outrageously effective. If you're an athlete or you compete, you'd be foolish not to engage in higher intensity training. But just from the perspective of weight loss, you can make a better choice. It's not, I think most people would recognize that one size exercise program does not fit all. And all I'm doing is just really repeating that message. from a weight loss perspective, there are many ways that you can do to lose, many exercise programs to lose that weight that don't necessarily correlate with performance-based program.
Good stuff. Chris, thanks for doing this. I really enjoyed talking to you.
No problem. Yeah, let me know if it comes out. And again, like I said, it's not a big deal for me to go to my office at school. It would definitely be a better connection there, I'm assuming. So
yeah, I'm happy to do a part 2 in the future. And the audio hasn't been great, but it is what it is, And I think the information's really great. And I think that the listeners who are really interested in this stuff should just suck it up and listen to it, because it can't always be perfect. So for everyone listening, for all of the show notes and links and resources and everything that Chris has mentioned, including research papers and things like that, please go to corporatewarrior.org. And until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com to get your free ebook with 6 interview transcripts of some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Simone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are not verbatim, deliberately. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's C-O-R-P warrior.com, and enter your email address. Then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts.